All right, we're going to be working on the Unit 3, Chapter 16 exercises, and we're going to plow right through this whole list here as best we can with the time we have available. We'll start with exercise 16.1. I do kind of want to reiterate what I have here in this block, that these solutions are technically provided by the author if you want, and that meaning the even numbered exercises. And I do at times assign these because I think the exercise itself is good. And yes, I will be releasing exercise videos on this if I haven't already. Well, some of them are released, but I will be releasing the rest. All right, let's go ahead and move forward and go to exercise 16.1. I have preemptively opened up Eclipse, and I'm going to just begin by creating the project here in the Package Explorer. I'm going to go ahead and create a new Java project. I'm going to call this chapter 16 because that makes sense. And I'm going to click finish. All right, now all my code will go in here and I'm all set to work. I know that I'm going to be working on exercise 16.1 right away, so why don't we just go ahead and get started? Even though I don't know what the point of it is yet, but we will figure that out in mere moments. All right, let's go ahead and do our public static void main, calling it exercise 16.1, no package declaration. We're ready to roll. All right, let's do all the standard mechanical stuff here. So we're going to extend the application class. Let's control space to get the library. All right. Class name highlights. Let's add the start method. And then you guys know I'm a fan of moving the main method to the bottom and just putting it out of my way. All right, so those are the basics. I also am kind of lazy, so I'm going to go back to my chapter 15 work here and grab the stage and the scene because I always hate typing that stuff in anyhow. And so I'm just going to grab just that little tidbit. And drop it into the start method. I'm also going to put in a little launch directive here so we don't forget, because otherwise I invariably forget and I'm like, why isn't it working? And it's always something simple, typically. All right. Getting rid of the unnecessary comments here, and now we are ready to kind of dig into the work. So let's go see what our task is. I'm going to save this file, Control S, folks. All right. Exercise 16.1 reads as follows. Use radio buttons. Write a GUI program as shown in figure 16.36a. You can use the buttons to move the message to the left, the right, and use the radio buttons to change the color for the message displayed. Now this sounds pretty darn familiar to me, right? We've done stuff like this before. Moving stuff around is a piece of cake.
There's something very loud in the background.
Okay, over my voice?
Yeah, I just wasn't sure if it was yours or if it was someone else.
Okay, let me
Yeah,
see.
someone's fan's going.
Does that help?
No.
Okay, I'm going to pause the video for just a sec. All right, so since this has some similarities to things we've done, there's not really a lot of extrapolation we need to do here to get most of this to work. So I think that most of you at this point will feel comfortable with doing the buttons because it's kind of repeat, moving the text back and forth. It's just a different object. The hard part is really doing the button aspect of it. So that's the part we're going to focus on mostly here. So here we go with the first part of this, and that is thinking about how we're going to get the buttons onto the screen. Now, we have some kind of easy stuff to do here, and the first easy thing that I see is that we have these labels, right? So we have labels that are just the names of the colors. We also have basically the objects themselves, the radio buttons. And I'm also noticing that they're kind of seem to be like in their own area, grouped together. And now grouping of the radio buttons is going to be actually critical, by the way, to making them operate correctly. Because if you do not group your radio buttons, same is true in HTML, then they don't behave the way they're supposed to. And then it can make applications break. So we're going to start by just doing the radio buttons. And here's the anatomy of how we do that. All right, so I'm just going to start here. And I'm not, I realize this is underlining right now. We will fix that, I assure you. But I'm thinking first about the radio buttons just because I know a lot of the other stuff I've done before. And first we have to start by pulling in the class for radio buttons. So just type radio button class, control space for the library, add that in. And then let's call the first control the red one, I think is how it in order on the screen. Now, like we have for some of the other objects we put on the screen for Java effects, we kind of have this naming convention a lot of programmers use, and a lot of people will prefix radio buttons with RB. So when you're looking at the code for it, you know it's radio button, whatever. And since this is B for red, let's just make it RB red. That will be a new radio button. And I guess the text next to it should say red. All right. Now you guys know we need some other colors as well. So they want yellow, black, orange, and green. And so let's just copy and adjust. So now we'll do yellow, black, orange, and green. All right, let's change the text here as well. Should match. All right, so that's step one. We've created the radio buttons. We've named them as objects. Now we're ready to group them together. So let's take that next step. So the grouping here is going to happen with a special class called a toggle group. That does need a library as well. And we can just call this, whatever you want to call it, really. I'm just going to call it group. And, maybe you could call it like RB group or something like that, whatever makes sense to your brain. Let's go ahead and instantiate, parentheses, and a close semicolon. All right, now we need to take each one of these objects here and one by one add them to the group. And so you do that basically like this, calling the object by name, then say dot set toggle. I was hoping for the auto type there, but it's not happening. I guess I got to type correctly. That helps. Let's try that again. See, it's easier when Eclipse does it for you. And which group are we adding that to? Group. All right. So now, once again, this is a repetitive process. So let's just go ahead, get 4 more copies in there. And then we're just changing the name of the button. So we'll do yellow. Question?
No, I'm so sorry. Excuse me. I was switching devices.
Okay. No problem. I just don't want you to be out there all bedazzled and lost or anything. All right. So we are now grouped together. So all the buttons now are logically in a structure, virtual structure, mind you, but they are grouped, and now they can behave together. All right, so now the next thing we need to think about, and we haven't done this yet, is how are we going to get these objects on the screen? And often we're thinking about that first. And for me, if you remember, whenever we did applications like this, these are really similar to that whole like border pane thing. You guys remember that structure where basically the screen generally is broken down, with the whole screen, the top, the bottom, a right, a left,
The border pane?
and a center. That's a border pane. And so to me, I mean, we have a center, we have a bottom, and we have a top, right? We don't have to use the left and right, so that's what we should use. I think it's a no-brainer. So we'll do that. So let's go ahead and add in that structure, and I'm going to put that right above. Let me get my mouse pointer back here. I'm going to put that right above the stage and the scene here. All right, so I'm going to call in border pane, control space to add the class. Since I'm already feeding in pane, I may as well just call it pane, right? And this is a new border pane. Empty parens and a semicolon. Now, we're going to put stuff in the top, we're going to put stuff in the center, and we're going to put stuff in the bottom. That's what we predetermined. And I haven't created these things yet, but I can kind of plan for them. And the reason I'm doing this is I just want to remember what parts of it I'm going to put into the border pane. So the top part's going to be the radio buttons, and the center one's going to be just the text, and the bottom one's just going to be the buttons. So why don't we work on these just one at a time? We have the radio buttons built, right? So let's do those first. That makes a whole lot of sense to me. And so now we're going to take those and put them right into that top area. However, do we just want to dump them into the top area? And I'm going to say no. What would be better is, why don't we put them in an H box, a horizontal box, and then put that whole box into the border pane. I think that makes more sense to me. So let's begin by creating a little space, and let's call in the H box class. And why don't we call this RB H box for radio button H box. That's how I'm thinking. All right, let's go ahead and instantiate H. And you know what? Let's do a little spacing around those since we're at it. Let's not make them completely touch each other. Let's go 8 pixels. It's kind of been my favorite number this semester, I think. And now let's add the radio buttons to the H box. So the next step would be for the RBH box, let's get children. And this is a typical pattern we follow. Multiple objects, so we choose add all. And then we start naming them. And so what are we going to throw in there? A radio button red, radio button, type this right, yellow, radio button black, radio button orange, and radio button green. Need a semicolon there at the end. All right, so now we have them all grabbed. The other thing I'm going to do, just based on experience here, is I'm going to tell them to center, so they're not pushed off to one side or the other, depending on how big we make the window. So I'm going to do a set alignment, and I'm just going to type POS, position center. All right. Now, if you notice, if I select that automatically from that pop-up list like I did, that will automatically add the library. If I decide to manually override what it's doing automatically, then I have to add the class, or add the import. So I think that's a good tip. So one part of this is created. That's the part that's going to go on the top. So we can come down here and replace this now. And this is going to be, actually what we want to do is call the pane in. So we're going to call it pane dot set top. And what are we putting in there? The RBH box. All right. And that's now in there. Doing a Control S to save, by the way. All right. Next thing is let's get that text on the screen. The text needs to go into an object also. And so I think what would be really smart is to create a pane just for the text, and then take that pane once again and add it to the border pane. So you see the layering that's going on here. So we're going to call in the pane class. Once again, needs a library. And from there, why don't we just call this text pane, which is going to be a new pane. Having a little typing dyslexia tonight. I'm not like hitting the keys I want to hit. Maybe I'm sitting off to the left or right or something. All right.
Sorry, my life, man.
All right. Next thing we need to do is actually put some text inside the text pane. So we will need to call in the text class. Again, a library needs to be added. And let's just call this, something creative like text. Since we're not going to have a lot of it, it's okay to do that. And we want to send in some stuff here. In fact, we can, right from the constructor, by the way, probably set all the things that we need to without having to do positioning and all that stuff separately, or at least a lot of it. Let's go check the Java docs on this. And I'll just pull it up in the browser tab like I normally do. And you can just construct. You can just construct and throw in the text. You can position it, so you can give it an X and a Y. That's sounding pretty good to me right there. And it seems like that's probably all we have as construction options. But this one sounds good because then I can do the positioning right away. And so why don't we just come up with some numbers here? So going back to the application here, the first thing I'm going to think about is the size of my whole scene and stage. The book shows, the window is kind of being wider than it is tall. Last time I did this, these are the numbers I use. I use 400 wide and 120 tall. So given those dimensions, this text, I think, could probably sit, if it's 120 tall, that includes the radio buttons and the buttons at the bottom, then where's the stuff going to sit in the middle? I'm just going to kind of speculate a little bit on positioning. So I'm just going to put in a value here of 50 pixels for X and 50 pixels for Y. We'll see where it sits. And if it's not good, we'll adjust. And let's get that message in there. Programming is a nightmare. No, is fun. I hope you guys find it fun. Yes, and 3x.
I did anyway.
Well, I'm glad somebody did. So now let's move on, and we can control now the font and a couple of other things. So let's do that. Let's at least do something clever with the font. Anybody want to call it like a bizarre font name? Nope, not going to let you. I'm just going to go boring here. I'm just going to do Arial. And I just want to show you how particular, the syntax is here, but at the same time, the fact that I can kind of instantiate this on the fly at the same time. So I'm actually setting the font by creating a new font and setting it all at the same time. I could do those in separate steps, by the way. And this should say text, not test. And we do need to pull in JavaFX font library. All right, now finally, we want to get this into the pane. So let's call the text pane, get children. Oops, let's try it one more time. You guys notice how I back type farther than the mistake? So I get the auto thing to do it for me.
I do it too.
And then add, what are we adding? We're adding the text. And there's semicolon. All right. If you guys want to toy around with styling it a little bit, what the author did, and I'm just going to copy what he did in the text pane. he actually set a style. Now, I want you to keep in mind here that when you type that command that I just did, notice that it automatically can pull in style sheets that are pre-built, by the way, or if you have one attached. So if we had a style sheet attached, we could pull that in. But I'm not looking to do a lot of fancy stuff here. But I do want to just talk about this again, that Java effects with using the FX prefix. And of course, I forgot my, let's try that again. I'm going to reset this just so I can show you the auto version of it. And we are going to put in here now fx dash fx and then call in kind of the same way we do in HTML, border color, right? Notice the syntax is the same, and you can use hex code, RGB, color names, whatever. I'm going to do something kind of obnoxious, I guess. I'm going to call blue because it's a little bit brighter than what I did last time, which was gray, and that was kind of boring. But you'll be able to see it, and that's the important part. But if you wanted to like style any of the things here that are stylable, which is most of the objects we're putting on the screen, you can just put the object name in, set style, and start having at it, just like you would with the CSS file. If you're putting in a lot of styles, then I would suggest that you research how to attach a style sheet. Very simple, by the way. And you can type up all your commands there and call them in and attach them to objects directly. It's kind of neat that you can even do that. All right, so we got that part in there. So now we're ready to set the center pane. So let's go pane.set center. And what are we putting here? The text pane. All right. One last part we have to assemble is the buttons at the bottom. Once again, this is something we've done before. And so some of this is going to be kind of repeat. So I'm pasting some of this in, by the way. So we're going to do an HBox again. This time I'm going to call it button HBox. And I'm going to change my spacing here to 8 pixels because I just like that better. Then we're going to create a button. So here's the first one. I'm naming this one button left. It does require a library. So I'm going to pull in the button import. And then you see how I put the text on the button so it looks like the one that's in the book. And notice how I have spaces before it and spaces after, because otherwise the button gets really small. All right. And then, of course, we'll need a button for the right. Just pointing the other direction. Then we're going to do our get children. So we're pulling into the button box now, the left button and the right button. And since we're going to all that trouble, we may as well center them on the screen because that's the way the book shows it. So let's do the positioning as well. All right, so now we have our visual elements. And if we were so inclined, and we will be, by the way, we can now take a look. Oh, one last piece. Once we can take a look as soon as we put this piece in place, just to make sure everything's laying out okay. And, you know, if it's not, then we can, you know, take the time to adjust. And what are we putting in here? The button HBox. All right, let's be brave. Let's save this and hit the play button here. Compile the code and launch it. And so here you see the application. You can see my blue border is in place. I think I hate it. By the way, I'm not really liking it too much, but there it is. And we have the text on the screen. You know, that's not a perfect spot for it to sit, but it's not too bad, actually, that for guessing. I might increase the X a little bit to kind of put it in the middle. So maybe add like 50 pixels or something to it. None of the buttons do anything, but they look good, right? The radio buttons. You notice how the radio buttons are behaving just the way they should because they're already grouped together. That's what causes them to behave that way. And so interface-wise, our interface, I think, is really close. I'm just going to make this tweak here to the X position and maybe bump it up to, I don't know, let's go 80. All right, so the next thing we need are the event handlers. A couple of them we know how to deal with real easily. And that would be the ones that we would use for the left and the right button, right? And we also know how to move stuff, so we have this advantage, coming in. So I'm going to click down here in the start method and go below the scene and the stage now to put my event handlers. And I'm going to put in an event handler for button left. And we'll do a set on action. We're going to do the whole lambda thing like we normally do. So we just put in the letter E with the little pointer. And then we could run this off to another method to move left and then off to another method to move right. But let's talk about this. We're just moving left and right, right? So what are we changing? Well, the answer to that is the X and the Y. And so we can change the X and the Y by just simply saying, what are we moving? First of all, it's a text. And you know what? We can set the X by first getting the X, right? And then, well, if we're going to move left, we're going to subtract. Why don't we move, I don't know, 10 pixels at a time? So this simple little statement here is enough to move it. Now notice it did drop in, or did I do that? A semicolon incorrectly, but we pulled that out. And because we're only executing one statement, and this is kind of interesting, notice that there's no curly brackets here. So with one statement, you can skip the curly brackets. Okay, question, can you put the curly brackets in? Of course you can. It really is just creating a block of code, if you put the curly brackets in like this, and that should work if you put them in the right place. But we don't need them since we have just one statement. All right. So if this is button left, well, button right's just a very simple adjustment. Let's first change the name. And then simply change this to a plus sign so it's moving the other direction. All right, let's test these two. We're saving and we are running. So let's see if we can move the text left and right. Now the new position is a little better, but I think it could move over a little bit more. The text is moving just fine. Okay, and you know what? How many times did it click? 3? All right, so we're just going to take this up to 110. It's probably going to be the sweet spot. The left and the right buttons are working great. Now let's worry about the radio buttons. Now the radio buttons you can attach event handlers to as well. And let's just start by clicking let's do the red one. Not clicking on it, but writing the set on action for the click. And for this, remember, the set on action will automatically default to whatever the default handler is for that object, which for a radio button is when it's clicked. That's the default handler. And then what are we going to do in that situation? Well, we're just going to simply change the fill color of the font. And so I can put in my Lambda event handler, and then I can just simply call in the text, and I can say set fill and choose a color. And since this one is for the red, we may as well put in the right color. And there we are. And did it come in from the wrong library? Is that what happened here? Yeah, it did. And notice how Java let it do it. I don't want it to come from that library, folks, by the way. So I'm just kind of redoing all this. It's doing it to me again. Why is it doing that? Oh, because this is here. Let's get rid of that. And apparently it overwrote the Java effects color library. That's pretty interesting that it did that. And now I have to go back and see. Oh, okay, it's back. Or maybe it never left and I just didn't notice. But now it seems to be right again. Let's see if this works. Just the one before I try the others. It's silly to do the others if this isn't right. So let's go ahead and run it. And let's hit red. Yay. All right, so now we have the roadmap to finish the rest. What happens if I click on the others? Nothing, because I didn't program them to do anything, right? And can I move it? Yeah. All right, so here we go. I'm just going to grab the rest of these, by the way, and I'm just pasting them in. Yes, I'm cheating, just for the sake of time. And so there's all the buttons. And right, it's just a copy paste and an adjustment at this point. So make sure you get the right radio button name associated with the right color. Let's go ahead and save this one more time, and then let's show that it's running. And we can go red, yellow. Ooh, that's ugly. Black, orange, and green. And yes, we can move it as well. We didn't put any protection for it falling off the screen, so we can go off the screen. Isn't that great? And there it is, folks, all completed. So let's just do a kind of a quick review of the code here. So here's up through line 29. 29 through 57. And then the bottom part of the program. All right. Let's take a little break here. We'll come back in a few minutes. Next exercise we're going to work on is exercise 6. If you're looking for exercise 3, I do have a previously recorded video on that one. I thought it was more important to work on this one this evening, so let's do that. Basically, what we're going to do is we're going to try to create what we're seeing in figure A here, which is basically, in a sense, kind of like a mini word processor in a sense, right? And this is kind of, I think, a neat thing because it gives you the impetus and the idea of how some applications work, right? So if you're creating, a word processor, you have to think that somebody had to write the code so when you hit the italics button, it becomes italics, or if it's centering or whatever it's doing. And that's exactly what this exercise is about. This actually goes pretty quick, so I'm going to kind of plow through it in a pretty quick fashion. And now some of you, if you're coding at home with me, those of you in the session here might not be able to move that fast, and that's fine. Just keep in mind that one's also recorded. My real impetus is to talk about the concepts here and then move on to the next exercise and get that one covered, which I don't think is videoed quite as well. All right, so this is what we're trying to create, and then we're also trying to get it so that we can actually control these features here dynamically through the interface. So this is actually kind of a fun little exercise. Not too hard and interesting all at the same time. Let's go ahead and create a new file here. Let's go ahead and create a new class. Let's do all the standard things that we do. And at this point, all the students in my class know what I'm talking about. Just people on the internet watching this. Well, tough, watch the other videos. Okay, I'm having that weird effect where it's not like doing the libraries for me today again. Let's try that again. Here's the other effect I'm having. It's not saving. I'm pausing the video here for just a sec. All right, I had to save the file and reopen it to take care of the issue, but let's go ahead and add that application class here. Add the start method. Let's move the main method to the bottom. Put in the launch. and then get ready to do our work here. All right, let's grab the stage and the scene because we know we're going to need it. And then let's get down to the point where we're building the pieces for the interface. So when I look at that screen in the book, I see a text field and it's seemingly a label, right? And then a collection of radio buttons that we know those have to be toggled together. And then we also have another little collection of objects here. And we just have to think about how we're going to structure this. Now, the way that I see it, we can put these into kind of a collection of different things. And really what I'm going to do here is I'm demonstrating techniques, if you want to think of it like that. So one thing that we could do is we could just throw it all into a pane and see what happens, but then we might not get the effect that we want. And so I want some level of control. And so the way I'm looking at this and the way that I did this last time is instead of, maybe just dealing with a pane, or I suppose I could do a border pane again, but I just kind of want to demonstrate different techniques. I'm seeing that this is really a collection, perhaps, of maybe two separate H boxes. And maybe really this could be its own H box and that could be its own H box. And now maybe that's like doing overkill, but one of the things I really want to kind of impress upon you guys is when you're doing layouts, to think about how things encapsulate and how you're grouping them together so that when you're putting them into other objects, it's really easy because you've already grouped them and named them. And that's really kind of the main impetus of what I'm doing here. It's not to make it more complicated than necessary. All right, so I'm going to think first that I'm going to put the stuff in like one bigger box. And the first thing that most people say is just use a pane. Okay, well, yeah, I could do that. But you know what? Here's one that we haven't used a lot, which is VBox, vertical box. And I can use that to kind of hold everything. And you'll see how I use it. So I'm just going to call this VBX equals new VBox. I'm going to put in 10 pixels of spacing. And we're going to start to put all the stuff that we need into that structure. And so I'm going to just show you kind of like this, like basically a layering technique, if you want to think of it that way. And I'm going to add all here. And all the stuff I'm going to put in here are going to go into this spot. Right? So I don't know what the names of those things are quite yet. But I do know that what I'm pushing into the main window is going to be that VBox. That's going to be my main structure. How big should I make it? Well, to me, it looks like it's really wide and really not that tall. So I'm thinking it's maybe 100 pixels, if that. So let's just call it 100 pixels tall. And you know what? 400 wide's probably adequate. We'll find out when we get there, of course. And we don't know what those objects are that are going to be in there. But I'm thinking the way that I'm going to proceed is I'm going to break it down piece by piece. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at that screen, and why don't I just take these one at a time and create the structures first, and then we can worry about all the other things. So why don't we start with the text pieces, and then we can add those to an H box. So let's start out here. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a text field. All right, add your libraries in. And notice how I'm calling the text field. Pretty redundant, but it gets the point across, I suppose. Next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to think about this other text field object on the screen. So the one that I'm thinking of is the fact that I have this field to type into, and then this other one up here that we're going to have the text that we're going to be messing with. And so I really need 2 text fields, not 1. And so one is just the one for up here, which is going to be called text field, and the other one is going to be down here, which is for column size. So therefore, I'm going to paste in this one. So another text field for column size. So 2 text fields, 1 text field, 1 column size. For the rest of this, I'm probably going to do a little bit of positioning and stuff, but I'll come back and do that later. But I do want to preset the columns available for each of these. And so for the text field, the first one where we're going to have our text, I'm going to make that a little bit wider. So I'm going to set that to be 13 columns. And then the preferred column count, I'm leaving at 3. And the reason I'm leaving that really small is I don't want people entering really large numbers, because I'm going to program this so it adjusts column size. And so we don't want to get too big. So we're kind of showing them that, hey, don't put too big a number in. All right, so now that we have that, we can now add that to a structure. So let's create an HBox, add the library. Let's call this HBox1. Notice I'm flipping the capital letters there. And a little bit of spacing in there. All right. Let's make sure that the stuff that sits inside that HBox is all going to be centered. So let's drop that stuff in. We need to add in the positioning library. And then finally, we are going to add HBox. And I want to show you kind of an interesting technique here. I'm just pasting this in for speed now. Let's make sure that we import the label library, and then we'll talk about what I just did. So we did the HBox get children add all, and then normally we just call the object in. But when you look at this screen, you notice that they have a label in front of it. Now, what I am doing in my code is I'm instantiating the label on the fly. In other words, I'm not putting it into a variable name where it occupies memory space. It's just printing the text on the screen and we move on. And so I'm just creating a label and then adding the text field. And I'm doing it brute force. So I would call this like a brute force approach, or instantiation on the fly, or whatever you want to call it. But a lot of programmers do this for simple things like labels, because we don't need to programmatically interact with the label. It's just text on the screen. All right. Now, we could now start looking at getting some of this. So in this HBox, we have the text field and the label, and start getting it into that VBox. And then we have to think about how do we get that? Well, this is going to be pretty easy, right? We just type in HBox1. So it's just added directly there. All right, so that's the top row. Now, what I would like to do with the next part of this is get HBox structures, once again, for the radio buttons, HBox structure for the column size group, combine those into an HBox, and then put that HBox into the VBox. You guys caught all that? And so we got to do that like one step at a time. So the first thing we're going to do is let's create the second HBox. So here's the second HBox. I'm calling it HBox2. I'm going to go ahead and set up some positioning on this. I want it to position its contents to the center. I know they're radio buttons, and radio buttons look better when they're centered. Then I'm going to start adding the radio buttons in one at a time. So here's left. And then, of course, we're going to put in center and right to mimic what's in the assignment description. From there, we will add all of this to the HBox. And notice how I'm kind of like creating it and putting it all together right in the same spot. Now, remember, when we're doing the whole radio button thing, we do need a toggle group. We need to group these together. Right? And you could have copied this from the other previous program, by the way, if you wanted. And then let's take those 3 radio buttons and add them all to the group. So This is just the box that holds the radio buttons, and that's not going to go in here, by the way. We're going to put this into another structure, but let's create the other structure that's going to go with it into that structure first. All right. And so with that one, it's going to be pretty darn simple. We're going to mimic what we did up here with this H box. And in fact, it's so much of a mimic, because basically we're going to follow the exact same approach. We're going to create the label on the fly. And so I'm going to do that down here because visually for me it makes sense to place it here. So HBox3 will hold a label on the fly and then the box for column size. Remember, that's the little box with only 3 columns. So now that I have an HBox2 and an HBox3, I want to put them in a different HBox and then feed that HBox into the VBox. So there's HBox4. I want you to notice I put a little extra spacing in there. What are we going to put in there? HBox2, all of this stuff, and HBox3, which is that other text field and the label that goes with it. Then finally, HBox4 will get added to the VBox. And because the VBox is the vertical box, HBox1 will sit at the top, HBox4 will sit at the bottom with the other 2 boxes inside. Right. This is enough for the interface. Let's go ahead and save this and let's see what it looks like. Does it look okay? Or at least in range? Well, it's not the prettiest thing in the world. I'm actually saying that's kind of too tall. Maybe that's okay. But I could probably drop this number down a little bit, maybe to like 80. And let's run it again. All right, that's a little better. Okay, doesn't look too bad. It's not perfect, granted. I'm noticing some inconsistencies. And so one of the things I'm seeing is how all the text is aligning and what's sitting too high and too low. And what I did last time, just so you guys know, is I added these positioning elements up here. And I don't know if they really helped anything because it's mostly for these 2 that I did it, where I position things bottom right. Let's see if it makes a difference. Not so much. I think it fixed the box, but it didn't fix the text. All right. I'm not really worried about that too much because, you know what? I did brute force on the label. So if you do it brute force, you know what one of the byproducts is? You can't control it because it doesn't have a name. So that's actually kind of an important takeaway too. So there's a convenient way to get it on the screen really fast, but now I can't control what it looks like. Because why? Because it does not have a name. These here, because they do have a name, are controllable. And so that's probably an important takeaway too. Right now we need to work on the event handlers. And these will basically allow us to do a couple of things. First, we got to shift this stuff left and right. And one of the reasons why I added this was just to make this look nice. So the column size thing. But with this one, the reason this one is added is to set the initial position of the text we're putting on the screen. So let me explain what that means. Notice where my cursor is flashing right now. Where is it? The bottom right of this text box. Okay, well, we can't tell it's the bottom, but it's on the right for sure. And so when I type, it's going to type this way. You guys see? Right? And so the goal is going to be that when we click these, it'll go center, left, or right. Because right now it's positioned right. Okay, so that's going to kind of be what happens. And so to see the difference, I'm kind of presetting that so we have a difference to work from. And so what each one of these event handlers is ultimately going to do here, which I'm placing below the stage. And oops, I grabbed part of the second line there. All right, so here's the left button. And notice all I'm really doing is I'm just changing the alignment to left. Let's see if that works and see if that, conceptually will do what we're thinking. So I got a little text in there and now I'm hitting the button and it's working. None of the others work, of course, because we haven't programmed them yet. All right. Let's now just copy this and do the same thing with the other two radio buttons. So center and right. Let's test it. And I like doing that with GUI programs, is doing a lot of testing as I'm going. I want to make sure that it's working. Now, for as silly as that is, I mean, that is kind of how a word processor works, right? And it works just that easy. So here's kind of a roadmap on how you can create something like that. All right. The next one is a little bit more of a thing. And I'm going to put all the code on the screen here and then just kind of talk through it. So this one with the column size, now this is kind of weird because what is the default action for a text box? Okay. Well, absent of actually having a button to click, it's the moment that you enter text into the text box, it's kind of doing its thing, right? So when does it actually trigger the action? Well, that's kind of really the question here. But I want you to look at this event handler. So once we trigger whatever that default action is, it's going to come in here and it's going to change the preferred column count, not on the column count box, the little one, but on the big one. It's going to change the column count on that. So basically what it's going to do, this is going to change the size of the box to whatever text we placed inside the column size box. So if I type 3, it'll only be 3 characters across. If I type 100, it'll be 100 characters across. And notice we're grabbing the text, and this is the part that gets kind of interesting, is because we're grabbing the text from the text box. Now, I'm assuming the person is typing in an integer, so it's going to parse it as an integer. Parse means to read text, by the way. And then we're going to put it through the integer class. We're going to convert it to an integer after we've parsed it as an integer, but it does come in as text. So text to a method that converts it, and then it's dealt with. And then that integer value, which drops in here, will then feed into this method, which then sets the column count on this field. All right, let's watch as we operate the application where it actually triggers. And this is kind of interesting. So I'm going to type in here, hey, whatever, and that's like maybe 10 characters, right? We know it centers and all that stuff, but I'm going to type in here now a different number for the column count. I'm going to type in 3. Okay, now I just typed 3, nothing changed, right? But when will it change? The moment I do what? What's the default action, do you guys think?
When you type?
Well, I did type. I typed in the number, nothing happened.
When you hit enter.
Hit enter. Very good. And guess what? If I also, let's say, change this to, I don't know, 25, this time I hit my tab key, nothing happened. So therefore, with the text box, the default action is enter. And that's kind of what we're looking for, because it's not really intuitive that would be it. That's not what I would have guessed. But you notice that I changed the column count. The text is still there. That's pretty cool. All right, so left, center, right are working. I can change my column count to something, press enter, and it sticks. All right, so that's exercise 16.6. The next exercise we're working on is, kind of similar to what we were just doing, kind of like taking those like font control things, throwing in a couple of new form elements. And basically what we're creating is this little program here that allows us to choose fonts, allows us to choose font sizes, bold and italic, and control the text on the screen. We are kind of tight for time here, so I'm going to be doing this in kind of what I would call rapid fashion. And so rather than, and actually, you know what, I'm going to, instead of even copy pasting it one piece at a time. I think I'm going to try a different technique, and that is I'm just going to open the darn solution file right here directly, or create a new file. Let's do it that way. So I'll try to follow this approach here. So this is going to be exercise 1614. I'm not worried about hitting the public static void main here because I'm basically going to copy my code in. And so my biggest challenge is going to be this, folks, getting it to work, right? So just because you have the code doesn't necessarily mean it's just going to work. And so first thing we see is the names don't match up on the class. And so I'm going to adjust here so the name matches the file name. I'm going to save it. I'm seeing I have no red underlines. That's actually pretty miraculous. But let's just take a look at the anatomy of this application. So a lot of the standard stuff in here, we do have our standard stage and scene, and I want you to notice the main method at the bottom. All right. In terms of how we build it, first thing I decided to do, really what the author decided to do, because this is his work, by the way, is we were presetting the pane width and the height with variables. So a couple of doubles, creating a private variable for label, which we were going to use the label for the programming is fun things. We're using a different approach this time to get it on the screen. Doesn't really matter. You could have done this with a text field as well, similar type of object. Then we're adding the combo box, and I want you to notice we're adding two different combo boxes. So the first one is a combo box that asks for a list of strings, and that's what this syntax means. So whenever you see the syntax in Java, a list is really similar to an array, but it operates a little bit differently. So a lot of the same type of syntax, and the main way it operates differently is the fact that we're predetermining the data type of the list here. And you'll notice we have one for string and one for integer to correlate with the exercise here, which I'm trying to pull back up. This will be strings, this will be numbers. And so we're pre-designing those lists to hold those, giving it a name, one's font name, one's font size, and then a combo box. But I want you to notice the syntax here as well. Because it's a list, when you instantiate, you have to have empty angle brackets and parentheses. That's the constructor for it. Because really we're dealing with an object that has many components to it. All right. Next thing we're doing is creating checkbox variables here for bold and italic, like we see at the bottom of the screen. These are all set to privates and are sitting outside the start method, by the way. And you could make it work with these inside, but the reason this is being done is that way, it's sitting on a global level and the controls are operating basically independently, but controlling it. Once we get inside the scene and the stage, we start out with a border pane. And basically we're going to put the text that we created up here, programming is fun, put in the center of the pane. So this is a border pane, so remember it has that center component to it, and that's where that's sitting. The other visual objects on the screen are going to be placed into H boxes. So right here you can see an H box that's got the label for font name, and a couple of other objects here positioned and then put into the H box. Then we have another H box at the bottom that's going to hold the checkboxes, combo boxes up here, checkboxes here. Then finally, as those are created, those are put into the bottom and top panes of the border pane. Part that's a little weird here also is getting the font names into the combo box. Well, here's where it gets kind of interesting, because this is done dynamically with your system, right? So these are things that are built into your system. So there's classes inside of Java that can read your system fonts and read them directly into this application. So you're not creating that piece. That's just something that you get to use, right? So that's a wonderfully simple tool. The libraries for it come from the libraries you see listed up here. Now, in terms of what's happening here, once again, I want you to notice another list that we're working with. And this time we're populating all the font names. And how are we populating it? With this method that comes from the font class. So this is pulling in this method from your system. And as it pulls it in, it will one by one add it into a list until it's done. Now, I happen to have a lot of fonts in my system, by the way. So everybody's list will be different. All right. Once we have those, we have them in the list, but we need to move that list into the object, so into the combo box. So the combo box is allowed to get the items it needs, and then we're adding them all like we add children, right, to other objects. And what are we adding? Well, from the list that holds all the font names. So we're taking the list of font names, moving it from this list right into that combo box. And we're presetting it so that the first one that shows is the one that's in position 0. If you wanted to choose another font, all you have to do is count down the list, see where that font is. So if you wanted to start with Arial, for example, you could figure out the position on the list, put in the corresponding index value, and you could pull that font up by default. But this is the default font that will show whatever's first on the list. Right. Finally, this loop will go ahead and then put the font size into the other combo box. So we're kind of using that same approach. So here's the combo box. We're getting the items. This time we're not pulling them from a list. We're just putting in numbers, right? Well, what's a reasonable font size to start with? I'm going to tell you what, a 1 is not really a reasonable font size. I might actually say that's kind of silly, that maybe the functionally the smallest you should get is like a 6 or a 8 or something like that. So I'll put in 8. And so we're not going to go from 1 to 100. That's silly. And it might even be silly to go up to 100 with a small application like this. So you might like cap it out at like 50 or 48 or something like that. But this is just a loop that's going to run. And then every time it increments through, it's going to put into the combo box the numbers 8 through 48. And then once again, we're also going to preset the value, which position we're pulling it from. Now this will be interesting because I changed this value. So did these correlate? Does anybody know the answer to that? Well, I guess we'll find out. That's what's going to happen. All right, now let's move on to the event handlers. There's not too many here, but the event handlers are going to be relative to the font we pick. So in other words, when I go to the drop down for the font, remember, it's now going to be populated with all the fonts from my system. So when I hit that box, I can select, and when I select, that selection triggers the event handler. And then notice that it's pointing to a method to set font. So we are going to change the font name by coming down here. Right. Notice we're putting in the class for font weight just in case it gets switched. Right. Now, we're not checking to see if it's bold. We're not checking to see if it's italic. What we're doing is we're checking to see if that was changed, what are we changing it to? And it will basically get the value from the list you clicked on and then set the font to that. It's very, very simple, in fact. And this is kind of like just a crossing the threshold of like interacting with your system level things. So there's a lot of things in your system that programming tools can interface with, and your font list is one of them. And it's not very complicated to do. The code is very, very simple. Now, with the other objects here, so one is the font name, so the drop down for the font name. The other one is the drop down for the font size. Notice it goes to the same method. And really what's going to happen is it's looking for the change that happened from that list. And so if I change the font size, then it will automatically change the font size based upon that little tidbit down in the method. Same thing is true for bold and italic. And then I want you to notice that it just checks to see, are they selected? If it doesn't change, it's not going to change it. See, that's the thinking. All right. If anything changes, that's the only thing that will trigger in this method. So that's why this one method can cover all of it. All right, let's go ahead and save this and run it. I'm going to hit the button. All right, so you can see here is my font list. My font size is preset to 1, so that number did have an effect. That's not good, by the way. Let's change the font size to start with. That's a 10. Well, that's really small. That's a 15. All right. And then I can choose. So, yeah, I have a lot of fonts, folks. So try to choose something really bizarre. There's one. Looks pretty normal to me. Either that or it's not working, right? So that one doesn't seem to be working. So let's see if we can trigger it to work. Or do we have to... Yeah, well, how about bold and italic? Bold and italic seem to be working. All right, so here's what I'm going to do for you guys. So this is really close to working. I'm going to put this in the code share. All right, so the one thing we're discovering here is the fonts were seeming not to work, but if you choose fonts that are fonts that the system recognizes properly, you know, like Arial, I'm trying to pick ones that don't have like sub-libraries to them. Here's an example. And I think that maybe when you have variants, so like if you look at all of these, right, that have variants, those are the ones that aren't working. But if you choose one that's just straight up, it seems to work just fine. And for as silly as this is actually, you know, this is kind of powerful. So some fonts don't have bold and italic. So it's not that there's something wrong here. But if I look at one that I know has that, like Arial, right, and then I choose bold and italic, you can see that it's working and that I can change the size, right? So it's a interesting little exercise, 1614. But unfortunately, folks, we are out of time for today. So this video ends here.